Hello everyone, and welcome to another USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture webinar. This webinar today is about donating and receiving wholesome excess food in school meals programs. My name is Jimmy Nguyen. I work for the USDA Food and Nutrition Service. I will be your moderator today. I just want to say that we have 596 registrants for this webinar, so there's a lot of interest in this topic. And I looked through the registration list, and most of you represent schools, so I hope that some of you may be able to implement some of the ideas that we share and talk about today. Here is our agenda. First, I will talk about USDA guidance on school food donation, and then we will move to our first presenter, John Williamson. He is the founder of Food Rescue and K-12 Food Rescue in Indiana. They now work in 341 schools and are doing creative things to empower students to begin tackling this problem of food waste. Next, we'll have Melissa Terry, an MPA graduate student from the University of Arkansas. She also works in the Fayetteville Public Schools. She is doing a lot of creative things to connect her school with the larger food community, and she's my personal inspiration. In her presentation, she will also talk about creating school partnerships with local grocery stores so that schools can take advantage of some of the wholesome excess food that is available in their community. Lastly, we'll have Maria Rose Belding, the founder of the MEANS database, which stands for Matching Excess and Need. And this is a great online tool that many of you may be using after this webinar, after she shows you its power to connect communities with food that is available that may be going to waste that community organizations and schools can utilize. So let's see if you guys are still awake out there this afternoon. Here's our first poll. Does your school currently donate excess food to charitable organizations, students, or families? And so you take a quick moment to have your voices heard. You can practice for our upcoming presidential election by voting. It looks like a lot of you do not have anything in place in your school to deal with your excess food, so which is good. You'll be learning a lot of new ideas from our presenters today. So let's go to the next slide. I just want to first begin by saying that the USDA is very serious about reducing food waste. Last year in September, our Secretary Vilsack announced our country's first ever national goals to reduce food waste. And the goal is to reduce food waste by 50% by the year 2030. And after this, the UN also adopted these goals in their Sustainable Development Goals. It's basically the same, reducing food waste by 50% by the year 2030. And the food waste reduction movement is gaining a lot of momentum. Just last month, the Ad Council, in partnership with the Natural Resource Defense Council, launched their Save the Food campaign. So you might be seeing some commercials or some billboards about that campaign. And just this month alone, there's conferences about reducing food waste put on by organizations like the National Consumers League and Harvard Law, Food Policy, and Law Clinic. And so this movement is just gaining a lot of momentum, and schools are going to play a critical role for us to educate younger generations about the problem of food waste, and also for us to reach that reduction goal. Okay, first let me begin by saying that, talking about our guidance on school food donation. First of all, our aim is to limit food waste and unnecessary costs through all of our child nutrition programs. That includes our summer food service program, after-school programs, school breakfast program, national school lunch program. And we recommend that schools implement or try some of these strategies first to reduce food waste, adjusting their menu, surveying or involving students in menu planning. And I've included some links here that you can click on. We'll be sharing this presentation with all of the registrants to this webinar after this webinar, we'll be sending out an email with the presentations, and you can click on all these links. We recommend share tables. Some of our presenters may be elaborating on how they run share tables as well. Allowing students to save some food items to eat later on throughout the school day. We also recommend some smarter lunchroom movement strategies such as recess before lunch, which has been shown to reduce food waste by as much as 40%. Extending the lunch period by even 10 minutes can reduce food waste by 13%. And then giving food items, entrees, and side dishes creative names to enhance taste expectations can reduce a lot of food waste. The Smarter Lunchrooms movement found that in one study that renaming carrots, X-ray vision carrots, doubled its consumption. In a high school that renamed its burrito, the Big Bad Bean Burrito, increased its consumption by 40%. And that Popeye picture on that slide is just to illustrate the fact that in 1928, spinach was the third most popular food item behind ice cream and turkey, and that was because of the popularity of Popeye. So schools, if you can incorporate fun, exciting characters in the names of your food items, that will get the students more excited about the food, enhance their taste expectations, and increase consumption. And that Superman icon is just to illustrate the X-ray vision carrot name that was studied by the Smarter Lunchrooms movement. And then slicing fruits can increase consumption by 73%. And the slicer that the study was, or the school that the study was on, they use a slicer that costs only $73. So it could be purchased for pretty cheap. And here's another idea that I heard from a school. They named their spinach Iron Man spinach, so it's a little more contemporary connection. Instead of Popeye, you can use Iron Man. Okay, here's our second poll, and you can choose the option that's best for you. Which food waste reduction activity that you have tried had the biggest impact on your school? Giving food items creative names, moving recess before lunch, extending the lunch period, slicing fruits into smaller pieces, share tables, involving students, allowing students to save food items to eat later in the day, or other. And if you've tried some strategies that aren't on this list that you think work, please type in that suggestion or idea in the chat box in your lower left-hand corner, and we can read it out to you, or read it out to the rest of the participants at the end. And it looks like a lot of you do slice fruits and involve students in menu planning. So these are all great ideas, and I'm sure you use a variety of techniques to help reduce food waste in your schools. I also want to mention that at the end of this webinar, the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll be taking your questions, and our presenters will be trying to answer them. I also have my colleague, Debbie Negri, here. She is our school meals policy expert, so if you have any policy questions for her, please type them in the chat box in your lower left-hand corner. Type in the questions as they come up in your head, and we'll be sure to read them out and get them answered near the end of this webinar. So I'm going to move on from this poll, but it looks like slicing fruits is our most popular choice, followed by involving students, which is always nice to empower the students and get them excited about food. Okay, and so let's get to, after you've tried all of those strategies, and you still have excess wholesome leftover food that you would want to donate, the USDA supports school food donations to charitable organizations, but schools must work with state and local health officials to see what is allowed. And oftentimes, and many of you who have explored this issue will have probably faced this, that local and state health and safety codes are more likely going to be more restrictive than FNS's guidance on it. So your state and local health officials will be your best friend if you want to implement a food recovery and donation program in your school. Okay, and there's also a resource that goes into more detail about USDA's guidance on food recovery and donation in all of our child nutrition programs. So let us get to the questions. We had great presenters, as you all probably will agree. These are the pioneers of the food waste movement, and let's get them to answer some of your questions. The first question is from Mary. Adjusting the menu is a great common sense practice. However, I see great quantities of milk being dumped, and that is a required item. Can the milk requirement be revisited? Melissa or John, do you want to tackle that really quickly? I think you already did in your presentations, but it's good to announce it again.
I was reading on Melissa's comments. Of course, milk is not mandatory in offer versus serve regulations, but a dairy product, I believe, is. So they've got to choose between 3 of 5, to my understanding. You've got a menu expert there with you, I would assume, Jimmy. Is that correct?
So basically there's 5 meal components: milk or milk alternative, meat or meat alternative, fruit, vegetable, and then a whole grain. And if you're an offer versus serve school, which 70 to 80% of elementary and middle schools use the offer versus serve option, the offer versus serve option is mandatory in high schools. So if you're most likely an offer versus serve school, and Melissa mentioned that the milk is not mandatory, the only component that is mandatory that the student take is the fruit and or vegetable component, and then they have to take 2 other items. So it's kind of confusing to talk about, but basically the student has to take 3 of the 5 meal components. One of them has to be the fruit or half cup of fruit or vegetable, but milk is not required under OVS. So we spent enough time on that. Email me if you have any other questions about that. Here's a question for you, John, that you might be able to answer. Is it allowable for a school to take the food off the share table and resell it at the next meal as part of their reimbursable meal?
Absolutely not. Yeah, that food from the share table has got to be donated or composted or given to, if it's completely wrapped, it could be given to like a backpack program or something of that nature if the school will allow that. But all those things really need to go through the local health department, and that's kind of been mentioned before.
Okay.
So there's no surprises.
Just to jump in there real quick and clarify, milk obviously is the most problematic for obvious reasons, and so milk coming off the share table needs to be refrigerated. Whatever doesn't get taken or shared by students during that lunch period needs to be refrigerated immediately, which also means that it shouldn't go into a backpack ever. The fruits and the packaged items, for sure, that's definitely an option. But what we do with the milk is whatever is not taken by students off the share table, we take it down to the kindergarten wing of our building, and they have a refrigerator. And so it goes into the refrigerator and gets to the proper temperature so that it can be used by students in the after-school program.
And just to clarify, in all of our programs, all the milk goes into the refrigerated area after every single lunch period. It doesn't sit there for 4 straight lunch periods, so it always has to be kept at the proper temperature.
Thank you all. Here's a question for Melissa from Emily Nixon. Since you are not sure what you'll be picking up from the grocery stores, how do you create a menu? Is there any flexibility in terms of changing the menu, substituting oranges for apples, for example?
So that's a really good question. We really never know what we're going to get when we pick up the boxes of food recovery, so it's a surprise every time. And we don't really have a set menu. We're an after-school program, so we have a little more flexibility than does the school meal program during the day. So what I do is we base our after-school program basic menu on the My Plate, obviously. So we have a grain, a protein, and fruits and vegetables. And so my grain is that I go and get just a huge box of saltine crackers, and the kids love saltine crackers, and a block of white cheese, which is what the kids call it, white cheese, because if it's not white cheese, it's orange cheese. And so I just have a block of cheese and the crackers as my staple. We have these every week, and then whatever we get that's in the food recovery boxes, we work around that. So sometimes we'll have 40 pieces of celery and 20 oranges or whatever, and then we just use what's there, and then we cut it up for the students to use, and then based on what we think that they'll eat, and then whatever we don't serve to the students, that's what you saw in the produce bags that we send home to their families.
Thank you, Melissa. Here's a question for Maria Rose Belding. It comes from Whitney. Is there a way to find out where means is being used in my area/state without joining means? I work with schools but am not a school staff member. I'd like to see which schools in our area/state are donating food using means, so then I can use local cases to convince other schools that they can get involved.
Yes, absolutely. So like I said, privacy is really important to us. If you will email Cody Olson, he's our Director of Partner Relations. He can help you get all of that information. This goes for everybody listening. His email is Cody, Kody, @meansdatabase.com, and I'll also post that here in the group chat for everyone.
Okay, and also John and Melissa, if you have access to your keyboard, a lot of people are asking for your email addresses. Can you send that, if you feel comfortable, Brian, send your email in the chat box to the participants?
Absolutely.
You bet.
Okay.
It looks like there's a hand raised up top. Do you see that? From Cheryl Benson?
There's no way for me to unmute her phone somehow.
Okay, Cheryl, if you have a question, type it fast.
But thank you for your concern. You have a good eye there. Here's a question from Leanne Peterson, and it mirrors a lot of other questions. If the school is using the wholesome excess food from the school lunch, for example, are they being reimbursed for the snack? Isn't that almost like double dipping? I don't know if...
Well, our program, our students all of our schools are donating to 501c3 not-for-profits. A lot of the reason for that is chain of custody. They just don't want to do it twice. So I'll let Melissa answer that question.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's definitely like the chain of custody and being good stewards of finances of our school programs, school lunch programs is obviously a very high priority. So your school may or may not have an after-school snack program that's part of the reimbursement program, and if so, then that's wonderful. Our school does also have a reimbursable snack program. However, our Healthy Choices after-school program only uses the food recovery items. So we avoid the conversation about double dipping and resurfacing and whatnot because we are using incoming food from our community partners for our after-school resources.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. Here's a quick question for John. It is, how can you convince a school district to let a certain school nutrition staff donate excess food? I can't find that exact question, but it's basically how do they convince the school officials that it's something that they should be doing?
We always start with the food service director. There's a temptation to go to the principal, the superintendent, but have a discussion with the food service director first and find out if they'd be willing to sit down with you and go through those point-by-point items that are in the open letter to schools, and just find out where the knowledge level is as far as what's allowed and what's not allowed, because these changes are very recent. So it's not abnormal that people wouldn't know about it, but if there's not willingness to do that, then you can build a grassroots movement with perhaps getting PTO members and principals and teachers, and just begin to see if you can build a consensus.
Thank you, John. Here's a question about what other evidence is there about food waste reduction programs and food recovery in schools? This person is looking for effective strategies and program evaluation frameworks. I think for the food reduction strategies, you can go visit the Smarter Lunchrooms movement. They're based out of Cornell University, and they've done a lot of research into the different strategies that they recommend. And you can access actually a lot of their studies and research through that website, and it'll go into a lot of detail on how they got the data. So take a look at that. And then lastly, there is something about if USDA would allow students to take only the items they want and to reimburse the districts according to components taken, this problem would go away. Unfortunately, this wouldn't follow the dietary guidelines, and we are mandated to follow the dietary guidelines. It's the law. And, the dietary guidelines are there so that students can have a complete meal. And if you offer the same things over and over again, the students are more likely to get used to those items, and over time, the students will start to enjoy the healthier items. So that's our stance on that. Unfortunately, we've passed the top of the hour. We're going to save some of these questions that you have, and if they went unanswered, I'll send them to the presenters so that you can have them answered via email. Again, the webinar is being recorded, and the presentations will be made available so that you can watch again, and we'll put them on our YouTube channel. I'll also send out the individual presentations that you've seen today as a PDF so that you can click on some of the links and resources that were shared. I would like to thank all of our wonderful presenters today: John Williamson from K-12 Food Rescue, Melissa Terry from the University of Arkansas and Fayetteville Public Schools, and then Maria Rose Belding from the Means database. Go check out that database and start getting involved. Thank you very much, and have a good day.